This class will be concerned with decision-making and decision-making models. Decision-making in an organization is very complex and requires a lot of analysis and a lot of judgment. Decision makers in commercial organizations are confronted by a lot of factors. Staff motivation, staff absenteeism, the need for training, the technology of the business, the competitive situation it finds itself in, the cash flow situation. Decision makers are confronted by a lot of variables, a lot of factors, and they must make decisions in the light of those factors. So decision making is an extremely complex process within business. Now we can identify three approaches to decision making: the classical, the administrative, and the political. And we're going to look at these in this session. Some of them are somewhat more realistic than others, but it's important that we go through each of them and see what their ups and downsides are. Really, as to which one is selected depends on the management. As to what precise process will be undertaken depends on management, and that will be a function of the information they've got and the situation that they experienced in perhaps the past, the experiences they carried in from different situations. So really, as to what approach to decision making is adopted within the business is a function of the management's own experience, the culture of the business, and what in the past has shown itself to be successful. But really, management needs to confront this issue of certainty, risk, and uncertainty. And those three are dealt with in a separate video. In fact, in the other video, we call them certainty, risk, uncertainty, and ambiguity. But really, it should be just the three of them when all said and done. Right, let's move to look at the first one of these, which is the classical model, and then we'll move on through the others, which will form the basis of this session. So start with the classical model. Classical decision theory views the decision maker as acting in a world of complete certainty. Well, that's a fantasy. That's not the world in which business operates. The business community face uncertainty. That's why they are the business community. That's why they are entrepreneurial. That's why they make entrepreneurial decisions. The business community face uncertainty about the market, about the technology, imports, the state of the economy, conditions in the labour market, the availability of skills, the availability of raw materials. They have to make decisions about many aspects of the business. And each part of the business is not certain. They're not certain about their supply of raw materials. The world may change. They may not have that supply in the future. Technology may change, which makes their current processes obsolete. So management are confronted by uncertainty. According to this view, Jensen and Buchanan, which is a very famous view, the decision makers are objective, they have complete information and consider all possible alternatives and their consequences before selecting the optimal solution. Now, I should state here immediately that these writers are not saying that that's what decision makers should do. It's in their review of the models, that's what they said about the classical model. They say that the decision makers should be objective. Well, decision makers are human, and we tend to be subjective. We then to make decisions in our minds. We are not driven mechanically by numbers and by computers. We are humans and we make decisions based on intuition as well. And we don't have complete information. That's not the world in which we live. The world in which we live is uncertain. There are wars going on and political situations and changes in economic circumstances, and there are all sorts of factors in play which mean we don't have complete information. And we don't even know what the possible outcomes of our decisions are. The possible outcomes of our decisions will be in the future, and the future is uncertain. We're not sure about what's going to happen then. And as for picking an optimal solution, well, we'd have to have a lot of information. We'd have to be able to process the information. We'd have to have some criteria to assess the information as to what then is the best. This sentence here, which as I said is not sort of being advocated by these writers, it's their review of this model. But this sentence suggests something mathematical in the decision-making process. It's complete information, so there's no problem about risk and uncertainty. And choosing the alternatives is quite mechanical. It's looking for the best one. And what do we mean by the best one? It's the one perhaps that maximizes profits or maximizes sales. So it sounds like a mathematical solution. The underlying assumption of the model implies that management should make logical decisions based on the organization's best interest, one in which maximizes value. Again, this mathematical theme is coming back. Maximizing value, maximize profits, maximize sales, maximize growth. Whatever the objective of the business is, maximize it. And logical decisions, impersonal decisions. As I said, the world in which we live may be somewhat different. People are emotional. People have good days and have bad days. People make good decisions and bad decisions. And sometimes we have outcomes and we don't know if those are the maximum outcomes or the worst possible outcomes. We just have outcomes. The decision maker is seen as objective, someone who has complete knowledge and is able to select the best alternative which yields economic benefits. It's the mathematical view again. Now the classical model assumes the following. It assumes that decision makers operate with clear goals and objectives which have been agreed. And the problem is clearly defined. So the decision makers know exactly what they want to do. Which again is not necessarily the case. Sometimes decision makers have to respond to situations when they happen. The business is running perfectly and then a machine breaks down. The decision maker has to respond to the breakdown in the machine. Have it repaired, have it replaced. Look at the technology of the machine, look at the cost of running the machine. There are many factors now to take into account. Then look at the rate of change of technology. If they buy a new machine, will it be obsolete next year? Will the market turn against this particular line of output? So there are problems. They don't have clear objectives, generally speaking. And complete information, it's difficult to even know what that means. It sounds good, but having complete information means knowing everything regarding the alternatives and then making the proper decision. But complete information is, generally speaking, not available. Even if we had a lot of information and we think we have all the information, we may not have. We may have missed something. Or simply the information we have will be out of date by tomorrow because something new will have happened in the marketplace. The consequences of are all known, and the decision maker selects alternatives which will maximize value to the organization. Well, having even if we know all the information now and having made the decision, it doesn't mean we know what the outcomes will be. The outcomes will be in the future. And as I keep saying, we don't know what the future will be like. The future may be good, it may not be so good. It may be that the output will be as predicted, but no one wants to buy it. The market has turned against the product. Or it may be there are cheap imports, or the competitors have responded by coming up with an even better way of doing it, or a better product. There are all sorts of issues. So the consequences of decisions can't be known with certainty. And that's one of the assumptions of the classical model. But it is useful in programmed decisions, day-to-day decisions which are come up all the time and where information is being collected, perhaps figures have been collected, statistics, and where calculations can be done. But it's just simply important to remember that we should not become arrogant because we've got statistics. The world is uncertain and the future is uncertain. Here's one model that looks at this sort of certainty process, and this model is discussed in a separate video also, so I'm not going to go through it. It's not an easy model to remember, POGADSCIE, but nonetheless that's the name of the model, and it's one which is dealt with in a separate video, but I'll just sort of skip through it quickly. We have, first of all, identify a problem. Now this is in the classical sense. We identify the problem. Presumably we have no problems in identifying the problem. We set up, we look at the objectives, we set up the various scenarios, and we consider what the objectives of the decision will be and how it will fit into the various scenarios and how it will advance the business. So again, all known with certainty. Then we gather the information, and we'd very liberally say that there are no problems in gathering the information, it just gathered the information. Sometimes the outcomes of the decisions are in the future, so I'm not sure how we can gather information from the future. We can't gather information from the future, but this approach would suggest gather information and gather as much information, I suppose, as we can, allowing for the fact that we can't gather all the information. Then we analyze it using some technique as opposed to some other technique. So we've rejected some, and we've done that because we're very logical people, presumably. I'm being a little facetious at the moment, forgive me, but it just comes across as simply too watertight. We collect the information and we analyze the information. We devise possible solutions based on the information. So we looked at the information, we look at the possible solutions, we then select the solution because we will have some information, some idea about what the outcome is according to this model. Then we communicate what the decision will be with those who are going to implement it. We plan and implement the solution, and we evaluate the effectiveness of the solution. And it all sounds very, very straightforward and very clear and very logical, except in the context of what we're discussing in terms of risk, uncertainty and decision making within that sort of climate, this is difficult. It's difficult even to identify the problem sometimes. It's difficult to identify the objectives for a solution. What are we trying to achieve with the solution? Gathering the information may be a problem. It may be all not available, or it may involve some projections as to what's likely to happen in the future. And we can go through all of them. There are problems here. But in a sense, if we adopt this approach, we simply ignore the problems. The classical model has gained its reputation from helping decision makers be more rational when making decisions. It's this mathematical view again. the decision makers are more rational, they're more calculating, they're more logical. Sometimes entrepreneurship can be almost irrational. Irrational because it goes against the thinking of the day. And there are many great inventions, discoveries and innovations which would have been ruled out if people didn't take the chance, if the people simply didn't see it as having some possibility of success and they wanted to take it on as something new, something which had not been tested before, something which had not been used before. And that's how we get new products. The classical model is very useful when using quantitative techniques, such as, for example, decision trees or break-even analysis, forecasting, linear programming and critical path analysis. Now, these are the subject of other videos also, but something as simple as break-even analysis is, in a sense, based on the classical model. The fixed costs are fixed, the variable costs don't change over that period. Sales is a fixed price, so it's a nice straight line perhaps, and we have a break-even analysis. In fact, it's using this mathematical approach to decision making based on perfect information. And as I keep saying, the world in which we live is extremely uncertain. Let's look at the limitations of the classical model. The model sets guidelines on how decisions should be made, but in practice does not take into account how managers actually make the decisions. So, in a sense, the model is recommending that managers should be logical and make decisions with full information, but in practice, managers have to work with what they've got. So the model is suggesting one thing, but the managers may not have those resources or access to decision-making techniques which would lead to perhaps a better decision if the information was available. So managers have to make decisions differently. Working out the classical solution is time-consuming. Look at all the possible alternatives before a decision is made. That's not really what management do. Management look at a number of outcomes, possible outcomes, and then try to pick the best one from that number. They don't wait and wait to look for every conceivable outcome. If they did that, decision making would be very slow and perhaps competitors would outwit them and take more of the market. The management itself may not have the skills to make extensive calculations and use sophisticated statistical techniques to make estimates or look at sophisticated programs, linear programming or integer programming, or look at any of these techniques. The management simply wants to know what the decision is or could be, what the likely outcomes could be, what are the assumptions on which that likely outcome is based, and then try to make a decision. There are also, of course, external influences, social, political and cultural, and these influences are constantly changing, which changes the market, which changes the attitude towards the business, changes the environment in which the business operates. The government may not like particular businesses, or the taxation system may be very high, which leads to all sorts of issues in terms of profitability and survival of the business. So there are all sorts of issues involved in decision making. Let's turn to the administrative model. Unlike the classical model, which is normative, which is what should happen. By normative we mean something which should happen, something ought to happen. That's normative. The administrative model looks into how managers actually make decisions in difficult situations. So this is much more looking at how decisions are made in a difficult situation. So it's different. So normative was the classical one, and now we're looking at how decisions are made in practice. The decision-making model that describes how management actually makes decisions in situations characterized by non-programmed decisions and certainty and ambiguity. Uncertainty, I should say, and ambiguity. So here's a situation which is quite realistic. Non-programmed decisions, these are unique decisions, perhaps one-off decisions. So there's no experience to help the decision maker. There's no information from the past. And they are confronting uncertainty in the marketplace. They're confronting uncertainty at various levels. For example, the technology of the product that's been purchased. So they're dealing with fuzziness, they're dealing with ambiguity. Now it's much more realistic. The model was proposed by Simons, and he developed two concepts to deal with this. What is called bounded rationality, and the second is called satisficing. So we're dealing here with how decisions are made under conditions of uncertainty and ambiguity. And these are not programmed decisions. These are one-off decisions, unique decisions. So it's quite a realistic view of how decisions are actually made. Sorry, I've skipped back. So let's go. Let's talk about the bounded rationality. Well, organizations have limitations in regard to rationality. Organizations are made up from people, and people are, generally speaking, not 100% rational. People are irrational. We make bad decisions. We're emotional. We have feelings. We do things wrongly, and we make decisions badly because we don't see all of the factors, and we don't calculate, and we're not rational. We are perhaps semi-rational. Organizations operate under extreme pressure and complexity. Well, as I said earlier, organizations are extremely complex. There are so many variables to take into account at any one moment in time. And the management don't have time, and they don't also have the ability to analyze all of the likely outcomes and look at all of the different scenarios. So the management have a limited time scale, and the management are also human. They have to take a break, and they have to pace themselves and make sure that they're making good decisions as they go along, not rushing the decision. So now we have a view of the organization working in situations which are not completely rational. There is some information. How reliable the information is may be debatable, but there is some. There's not all, and even the managers are not sure what all the circumstances are. And now the management have to make decisions. Satisficing, the second approach, is that organizations opt to look for the best solution. They look for some solution, they look for the best one, and they don't have much research. They have as much research as they can afford in the time span and with the financial constraints, but that's the research they've got, and they try to analyze it as quickly as possible. They don't go through exhaustively through all the possibilities as suggested in the classical model. Here they pick some solutions and they try to pick the best one from those and implement it. So bounded rationality looked at the constraints within the organization, and the management can't take everything into account. They have to make the decisions based on whatever time they've got available and the information they've got available, and work within the constraints of the real business, the bounded rationality situation. Satisficing, they pick a number of solutions and they pick the best one, and they keep their fingers crossed that they have picked the best one. Now, the assumptions of the administrative model. Well, organizations are complex and management is not always aware of problems that occurs within the organization. So organizations are complex. There are many variables, as I keep saying, involved in running a business. What the competitors are doing, the sources of the raw materials, the technology that may be used, the conditions in the labor market, importation and globalization, and so there are many factors that impinge upon the business, and management may not be aware of all of them. They can't take everything into account. They try to focus in on what they believe to be the important factors and try to deal with those, but there are some factors that can't be integrated because simply it's too complicated to take everything into account. So decisions are often vague and poorly defined. Sometimes when a decision is made, other managers may think they don't understand why that decision was made. They don't understand the logic for it. They don't understand why it was done or why it's being proposed, because the decisions are vague. Some managers may pick outcomes and decisions that others may have rejected. So there's an element of subjectivity involved. Or if you like, there's an element of entrepreneurial decision making involved. People are trying to make the best decisions with very little information or very little insight. Sometimes the decision-making procedures that we consider to be sophisticated, decision trees, linear programming, statistical techniques, drawing graphs and plotting trends and working out weighted averages and so on and so on. Sometimes they're not used. They simply have to look at the information and make a quick decision. They look at what they know or they think they know and make a quick decision. They haven't got time to go through all the calculations and then discuss the calculations and look at the assumptions behind the calculations. They don't have time, so they just make a quick decision. Looking at all the alternatives, looking at the internal and the external, all the alternatives internally and externally, well, it's not realistic. Within the business, as I said, there are many factors. The labour force, motivation, issues on the shop floor, issues in the office, training programs, skills, the need to improve skills, and then the technology, the type of technology, the obsolescence of the technology, the physical conditions of the business. It goes on and on and on. There's a long list of factors. And externally, there's also a long list. Globalization, cheap imports, the rate of inflation, the interest rate, the exchange rate. There are so many factors externally as well that may affect the business. So it's very difficult for the manager to acquire all the information to make the decision. And even if he or she did acquire all the information right now, it'll be out of date tomorrow. Tomorrow it'll be a different set of information. So management tends to favour satisficing over maximising due to external constraints and limitations. The management doesn't attempt to maximise. They try to make the best of what they've got. They satisfice. And satisficing means making decisions with limited information. They don't attempt to gather all the information. They gather all the important information that they need. All the important factors are considered, and they make a decision based on that. They may not use very sophisticated techniques to analyze the information, or they may just simply make the decision looking at the various alternatives. They are satisficing. They're not going through exhaustive processes to collect more information, to engage in sophisticated analysis, to reflect on the analysis and have discussions and meetings. They are looking at the decisions that they are aware of, that need to be made, and making the decisions. They are satisficing. The limitations of the model, well, it's too descriptive. It only explains how managers make decisions, but it fails to suggest how they should make the decisions. So the administrative model tells us how decisions are made, but not how the decisions should be made. So it's a descriptive account. It tells us how the decisions are made. Now let's turn to the political model. This is mainly used in decision making where uncertainty and ambiguity pose a high risk of decision failure. So when the business is facing decisions that could lead to failure, there's a high risk or there's a chance of catastrophic failure in this decision. Now in this situation they may reach for the political model. Management here come together to form a coalition. So different departmental heads may attend meetings and bring their own perspectives of the problem to bear on the decision. And they work as a team to resolve the problem. They identify goals and they share information. The production people will have one perspective. The marketing people will have a different perspective. The HR people a different one, and so on and so on. The accounts people will have a different view again, and so on. And out of all of this, a more informed decision can be made. So it's a coming together of all of the relevant personnel to try and make a good decision. It offers opportunities for managers to participate in the decision-making process. Sometimes managers are bypassed. The top management make the decision and the middle management implement the decision. Well, in this case, the middle management may be involved in the decision because their opinions are sought. It's going to be a complex decision. There is a chance it'll fail, so they want as many opinions as possible to be brought to bear on the issue. So it may be information is collected from a very wide constituency. Management at all levels perhaps might be involved in making the decision. So it's good for motivation. The management see all of them as involved, and the managers feel that they're involved and feel valued in their work. So it does have implications for motivation. Decisions are made through bargaining, discussion and negotiation. When the managers meet to make the decision, coming together as a group, they all have their own opinions and their own perspectives, and the forum enables them to bargain and discuss and negotiate until an outcome is reached. So the political model means managers and decision makers of all types come together to make a decision. The decision is made in terms of the corporate position. It is a corporate decision. It's the managers meeting to agree what the outcomes should be and how to achieve those outcomes. So the political model emphasizes organizations consist of people of different backgrounds, experiences, interests, goals and values. And this is the cause of conflicts and disagreements. So there is an issue here that organizations must first of all recognize that people are different. And that difference can be a strength, because you can also have good decision making because people are coming at problems from different points of view and with differences. They're not all the same. But it can also lead to, of course, problems within the organization on a day-to-day running of the organization. Information is complete. There is no rationality due to the complexity of the problem. So it does recognize that information is complete, and getting the managers together who are different and may not agree with each other, but nonetheless come together. They come together on a corporate level to make a decision to try and help the business make a good decision as to some perhaps future investment or some future course of action. Managers do not have the resources or time to collect information. They rely on exchange of viewpoints and intuition to gather the information. So sometimes decisions have to be based on feelings. They have to be based on what the management think. And having differences within the organization can be a good thing in that sense, because different managers have different perspectives. They're able to debate and discuss, and good decisions may emerge from that. If they all came in with the same opinions and the same feelings about situations, it would be, I suppose, suspicious on one level. On another level, it may have been that they're not thinking hard about alternatives and issues, and they're perhaps not taking the process seriously. Problems with the political model. Well, the model relies on viewpoints, discussions and debates in the form of a coalition rather than obtaining information. So there's a lot of emphasis on the information being with the people participating. It's not that the organization is trying to find the information. It's hoping that the people who are helping to make the decision will already have had that information from some other source. So it's not that reliable in that sense. There's also a problem about dominant members in the group. Sometimes personalities within the group can mean that decisions are distorted. Decisions, the strong personalities win the arguments and win the situation, win over the situation, when in fact perhaps an alternative is the best course of action. But the managers who held that view were weak and were not able to stand up to the dominant members, so the argument was lost. It doesn't have a structure. It simply relies on individuals' views and opinions. There's no structure laid down for this. It's simply a meeting of perhaps managers within the organization to make a decision. And there is no structure. Their points of view are captured and discussed and debated until one point of view emerges, and that's the one that the company will follow. So in this session we have looked at three models: the classical, the administrative and the political. The classical, a very, if you like, mathematical approach, very logical approach, complete information, rational decisions, logical decisions, not the world we can identify with, but a good starting point nonetheless for this type of discussion. The administrative one actually describes how decisions are made. It doesn't tell us how the decisions come about, it just tells us this is the way decisions are made. And the political model involves groups or coalitions or committees that come together to make the decision. And this way the information that the business has to acquire is minimized, because the hope is that the people attending the meetings will have acquired that information for themselves from various sources elsewhere. So the political one is a group making the decision and debating the various alternatives until one dominant one emerges, and then the decision is made. That completes this class, so that's all I'm going to deal with in terms of this type of decision making. So thank you for watching.